Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, welcome back. It's our custom to go around the room and say our names. Maybe take a breath before you move to the next person. And if you're new, please let us know again so we can properly welcome you. My name is Grisha.
I'm Tony.
I'm George.
My name is Steph.
My name is Ricardo.
My name is Ray.
Rob.
John.
Tim.
Oh, Rick, I'm not new. I haven't been here a long time.
My name is Michael P. I'm visiting from Provincetown.
Michael.
I'm Richard.
I'm Bob.
Jay.
I'm Hal.
Jack.
My name is Kat.
I'm Jim.
Peter.
Clark.
My name is Mark.
Harley.
Jeff. My name is Jerry.
I'm Larry.
Samuel.
Rob.
Matthew.
Jason.
Gary.
I'm Joe.
I'm Michael. I'm also visiting from Providence.
Welcome.
I'm Sal.
Tim.
I'm Frank.
Andre.
David.
Welcome, everyone. So today is our number 4 of the 4-part series on intimacy in the Dharma. So I guess it's our the denouement, the climax. Clothing optional, right? Our teachers today are Baruch Golden and Daigan Gaither. So Baruch is a longtime GBF member who has been practicing Vipassana meditation since 1998. He completed Spirit Rock's Community Dharma Leaders Program in 2012 and the Buddhist Chaplaincy Training Program at the Sati Center in Redwood City in 2013. He teaches Dharma primarily at the East Bay Meditation Center. Baruch is a registered nurse and did hospice work for the past 14 years. And Reverend Daigan Gaither began Buddhist practice in 1995 in the Vipassana tradition, and then began to study Zen in 2003 with Rushin Paul Roshi. He received lay ordination in 2006 when he was given the name Daigan, or Great Vow. He received priest ordination in July 2011. His work, practice, and free time include many hours devoted to community service in a variety of ways, including his work as one of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and as a volunteer at Zen Hospice Project. He has spoken nationwide on a variety of issues and has sat on a number of boards and committees that serve community and social justice. So welcome. Thank you.
So I want to thank the, God, this bowl is just right in the way.
I've always thought that.
Yeah. I want to thank the Sangha for encouraging this 4-part series investigation on intimacy last year. And I also want to thank you for being here today. So we're going to start with the poem by Rumi, A Community of the Spirit. There is a community of the Spirit. Join it and feel the delight of walking in the noisy streets and being the noise. Drink all your passion and be disgraced. Close both eyes to see with the other eye. Open your hands if you want to be held. Sit down in this circle. Quit acting like a lone wolf and feel the shepherd's love filling you. At night, your beloved wanders. Don't accept consolations. Close your mouth against food, taste the lover's mouth in yours. You moan, he left me, 20 more will come. Hopefully. Be empty of worrying, think of who created thought. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Move outside the tangle of fear thinking, live in silence. Flow down and always widening rings of being.
So I'm going to start today talking about shame and intimacy. I think that when we think about intimacy and we think about how it is that we are together, I think that we start with, like most things in Buddhism, we start with this one, with this skin bag. And how are we intimate with ourselves? And when we think about the things, the hindrances to intimacy, the things that get in the way of our intimacy, but also the things that, what gives rise to intimacy? What gives rise to that feeling of closeness? And I think that what gives rise to intimacy oftentimes is vulnerability. There's a willingness to sort of get out of our own way. And I think in order for that to sort of happen, to sort of cultivate that, we have to start to cultivate awareness of the role of shame in our life. I think that you can't participate in American culture in any kind of way and not be experienced with shame. That may or may not be true, but that's been my experience in working with others and working with myself. And Thanissaro Bhikkhu actually talks about shame that there's two different ways to think about shame. The first is the shame of regret, those things that we have contributed to that maybe we don't have the ability to sort of reconcile or make right. We don't have the ability to make amends for. So we all have these places in our lives where we've hurt someone or been hurt or hurt ourselves or lied to ourselves, and we just have created a place where there's there's not the opportunity to make amends. In my own life, I have there are places in my life where people that I've hurt that I have since tried to go back to make amends for or rectify, and they don't want to hear it. And so I get to just sort of be with that regret and shame, that awareness that I caused harm. And I don't think that shame is harmful. And Thanissaro Bhikkhu doesn't talk about it as a harmful type of shame. Because what it does is it helps me remember my own vow. It brings me closer to how it is that I want to be in the world. By sort of getting closer to this shame, I have the ability to sort of notice, oh yeah, that's not how I want to be in the world. I don't want to create those kinds of situations and those kinds of sufferings again. The other way that we can relate to shame and the other way that shame can be toxic is when it's not ours. When it's shame that's given to us. I think that as queer people, as people on the margins, we often, even if we have the most loving and supportive families, we live in a culture that wants to give us shame. As sexual people, we live in a culture that sort of wants us to be ashamed of sex and sexuality and the ways that we desire. And I think that that's true whether you're queer or not. But that's not ours. Like, we didn't manifest that. We just sort of end up being dragged around by it. And we see it in the ways that we disguise ourselves or step away from intimacy with ourselves. So I think that what we can do is we can start to practice with making friends with the shame that's in our life. Because when we make friends with those places that are uncomfortable, when we make friends with ourselves, in Zen, there's a story, a student is trying to meditate in a cave, and every time he sits down, the demons sort of come, and so he lights a fire, and he tries to do all this stuff to sort of scare away the demons, and finally he goes down to his teacher, and he's like, every time I sit down to meditate, these demons come and disrupt me and keep me from meditating. And the teacher's instructions were to feed the demons cake. An invitation to become intimate with, to become friends with, to feed our demons cakes, to make friends with those parts of ourselves that are difficult, that are painful, that are shameful. And in doing so, we manage to somehow not be dragged around by them. So that when we behave in the world, when we act out in the world, when we participate in the world, when we are with other people, we're not dragged around by our own feelings, but we get to have something close to an appropriate response. So I only had 5 minutes, and I think I took it up. But you and I are having a conversation now, right?
When I thought about doing this series, and then we had lunch together last week, and we were talking about, well, what should we do today? And you brought up looking at shame and vulnerability, and then I started thinking about it from kind of my own personal experience, and I was thinking about how I have been bullied by what one of my teachers calls heteropatriarchy, capitalism, and then homophobia, how all of these external forces have imposed these beliefs and views that I've internalized and that I believe to be me, and I could really see how shame lives inside of me. And then Daigan sent me a YouTube to watch about vulnerability. And I was just thinking about how just kind of doing this series and sitting up here, whoever is sitting up here, you could enter it in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways that you can enter it is by being very vulnerable and talking about something like intimacy, which you don't really hear that much about, especially relational kinds of intimacies. When you go to meditation groups, is a very kind of vulnerable place to put us in, because we're just saying what what our experience is and how we have internalized the Dharma to support practicing with that. And so just being up here allows us to be really vulnerable, and also in my relationship with you, because we don't really know each other that well. And whenever you teach with someone, it's like a risk. You never know what that person's going to do. It's kind of unpredictable. And so it's sort of like, so I was thinking about, well, how have I allowed myself to be vulnerable with you in this teaching relationship? And then also I was thinking about, I've been a part of this Sangha for a really long time, and how vulnerable have I allowed myself to be with this group and all the people in the group. And so for this past, I'll stop after this, but for this past month, I made the decision to try and be as vulnerable and intimate as I could entering into space. And what's happened is that I've come up against a lot of my own shame. because when I started practicing here, it was really shame, this history of shame that's embodied inside here that I was dragging with me. So it's been a good reflection for me.
Well, and I think that, the mention of teaching with someone as an intimate, I think teaching in general is an intimate relationship. The way I was taught to understand sitting in these chairs and taking my place has been that we are invited to tap into the interconnectedness of what's happening in this room. So that, yes, my lips are moving, and yes, I have some kind of agenda, but in the same kind of ways as when I meet with families of people who are dying, I get invited to just drop that agenda and then see what happens. And my teacher and I often speak about there's the talk that you plan, and then there's the talk that you gave, and then there's the talk that people hear. And like you said, I don't get to control anything except the talk that I give, right? And what I found over the years has been that the more intimate, the more I'm willing to sort of let go of my need to control it, let go of getting it right, my need to be perfect, to be some kind of projection of what it means to be a teacher, the more intimate we become, and then the more that this sort of organic process of all of us together speaking the Dharma happens. And it happens when I teach with other people too. Like, I think that there's an invitation to kind of just let go of that control, let go of that need to be right, the need to sort of, I have to make sure that they understand this. Well, actually, I don't. Because ultimately, there's nothing I can say that you don't already have. There's nothing I can give you that you don't already have. You are already enlightened. It's how does that get manifest? How does that get expressed? Your turn.
Thank you. Yeah, so the Buddha talks about the sense of being interconnected. And as I was reflecting on the idea of shame, sometimes I think, the way I think about shame is the way that I was taught within Buddhism. I've never thought about a healthy kind of shame, but I could see where, how he's talking about healthy shame as the type of shame that can provide some guidance to help us prevent harming in the world. But I always think of shame and guilt like, guilt is, I did something bad. And shame would be, or guilt would be, I made a mistake. And shame would be, I am a mistake. And so you could sort of see when you start doing this investigation of shame that there are all of these messages that we've internalized that have really influenced and informed the way that we have engaged in relationships with other people. And so I never really used the word shame. I always talked about it as kind of my core issue, or how I've been wounded, or the trauma that I've internalized growing up in this culture as a gay, queer man. And so kind of sort of understanding that way, and then just understanding when we don't really look at these messages, the ways that we have internalized things, and we don't look at the shame that we have that lives inside our body, that's really been embodied inside of us, then the expression of that in this culture is, and if when you look at pop culture, they talk about how shame is epidemic. And also it was really interesting, they were talking about how loneliness is epidemic, and loneliness is really kind of a side effect of shame. when I start looking at shame, I could see how shame has really allowed me to feel really separate in a lot of ways. And I think that, when we start looking at the separation that we do feel from other people, a lot of times is based in the messages that we've internalized that really drive us. And that how vulnerability really hits at the core of shame. And that it is a really amazing kind of practice to use in your life. How are we doing? Go ahead.
Well, and I think that you again struck to this note in me about loneliness. I think that my sort of default position in the world, when I'm just at home, nothing really going on, my default position is to be lonely. And then I bring in all kinds of stories that sort of confirm that. And for a long time, I sort of acted out of that loneliness, And then when I started to sort of just let myself be lonely, and I could see what was underneath the lonely, when I could see what are the things. The great thing about Buddhist practice, we have these 4 foundations of mindfulness, and in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Buddha talks about noticing what gives rise to an experience, an awareness, and then also what gives rise to that experience falling away. And so we can do that with these things like shame and loneliness, when I can just experience my loneliness and not be afraid of it, and let go of my need to control it and make it something else. I somehow manage to kind of notice, like, oh yeah, when I push people away out of the need to control or not, the unwillingness to be vulnerable, and that gives rise to loneliness. And then I notice, well, what causes the pushing away? And oftentimes it's, I feel ashamed. I feel ashamed that I don't have enough money. I feel ashamed that I don't know what they're doing. And I can't excel at whatever it is that they want to go do. So all of these ways, that my interactions, I'm ashamed because I don't feel like I'm okay in my body, or like all kinds of messages. I can notice, like, oh, that's what's going on. And then when I don't force myself to sort of dress it up, when I'm not forcing myself to sort of make it into something palatable, when I can just be with this raw experience, I find that it's not so. I don't have to be dragged around by it. I no longer need to be subject to its whims, but I can make choices about how I want to be in the world that maybe are different. Because see, that's the thing about these shadow sides, these things like shame and these things like these stories about that I've internalized, is that as long as they're shadows, in the shadows, I no longer have the ability to decide how to respond to them. And I just get sort of dragged through my life.
So, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the direct application of what you were referring to in the teachings of the Buddha, and how we can use that in relational intimacy. Because intimacy is really allowing someone to see us, allowing someone to know us, and see, and kind of the same as seeing someone and knowing someone. And for some reason, just making the decision to be vulnerable can be such a huge decision. Staying in the conversation, doing something that feels risky. I often have a big conversation with myself before I'm vulnerable. And so I wanted to talk just really quickly about This is going to lead up. We're going to have you do dyads. But I want to just say something about how there's direct Dharma to support to do this kind of work. So the Buddha, in his teaching, in the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, and I know there have been a lot of teachings about that here, the Satipatthana Sutta, he identifies 4 areas of practice, and in between each set of meditation exercises, there's a refrain. And so when he tells us that we need to practice with being in the body, or being with the breath, or being with the body moving, between each area, he identifies 4 specific areas about how to stay and be with our practice. And Daigan identified one of them, which is paying attention to I think you said the arising and passing of experience, yeah. And the one that I just want to mention that he talks about is that the Buddha tells us that we need to practice contemplating physical and mental phenomena internally, that we need to practice contemplating mental and physical phenomena externally, and that we could do the same thing, we could do both at the same time. So we could be with our experience, we could be with our subjective experience, we could be with the subjective. Theoretically, we could kind of understand on some level the experience of the person that we're being with, and that, I don't know if it's really possible to do it simultaneously, like be with our experience, but our minds work so quickly that we could switch back and forth really fast. So there is this book that I read a couple of years ago, A General Theory of Love, and I don't know if anyone's read that book. Yeah, it's an interesting book. And in the book, 3 authors, they talk about limbic resonance. And limbic resonance is a really interesting idea or concept, which really supports this idea of doing this kind of relational practice. They say limbic resonance is is a symphony of mutual and internal adaptations whereby 2 people become attuned to each other's inner states. A symphony of mutual and internal adaptations whereby 2 people become attuned to each other's inner states. So they're suggesting, and I think we have this ability to detect the internal state of another and to adjust our own physiological response to that. And that could have been what the Buddha was talking about when he was saying that we contemplate and pay attention to people outside of ourselves. So, looking, and we've probably all had these experiences where we have felt this attunement, where we sort of self-regulate to another person. So within the concept of limbic resonance, there are 3 things that I thought was really important. He says, or they say that our brain chemistry and nervous system are measurably affected by those close to us. So this really gets at the sense of being interconnected. We're not separate. We're not isolated. Everything affects everything. And we are affected, and we can train ourselves to pay attention to how we are affected. He says that our mind, body, and heart synchronize with another in a way that has profound implications for lifelong emotional health, and that the patterns that we have around paying attention to another person can be modified through therapeutic, and I'm just adding mindfulness practice, so that we can actually train ourselves to attune to another person. And that this happens non-verbally. There's an expression in our culture that feelings are contagious, and just the example that comes to mind immediately is if you get into a BART car and there's some agitation going on, there's this sense within the car that something doesn't feel right. You could feel these things. And we all have had these moments where we've been with someone where this attunement has happened, and we feel this incredible mutual symphony, the sense of communion with that person. So I think we can train ourselves, and this really would support allowing someone to know us and to see us, and seeing another person and knowing another person, to do that. So what we wanted to do is we want you to be in dyads. It doesn't matter who you're with. And what we want, we're going to give you a couple prompts to talk about in your dyad.
Why don't we break up first?
Okay. So just find a partner that's close to you.
Turn and make sure you're facing each other. Yeah, I think I want to give a little, when they're in dialogue, I want to give a little instruction about how to actually talk, how it is that we can practice that.
Let me just say a couple things.
Because I think that that's what we're trying to get at. Does anybody need a partner?
Okay, do you want to say that?
Yeah. Okay, so I want you guys to, as much as possible, get as close as you can with each other. Make sure you're facing each other. Allow your knees, even if you want to touch knees. If you're on different heights, maybe you can figure out a way to connect. But the idea is, if you feel comfortable, allow yourselves to be as close physically with each other as you feel comfortable. So this limbic resonance that Baruch was talking about, in my world of chaplaincy, we often talk about it in terms of active listening or compassionate listening, where while we're listening to someone else, we're asking people to join dyads. Maybe you could, there's a triad here, maybe you could grab a friend together.
We're going to have a love sandwich.
That's fine. And in this compassionate listening, or this intentional listening or active listening, the idea is that while I'm hearing the words that someone else is speaking, I don't necessarily respond to them. But instead, while they're speaking, I sort of take those words in and allow them to just sort of resonate. And then notice the experience I'm having while I'm listening. Does that make sense? So we're not responding. We're trying to actually limit the amount of response. Notice the ways in which you want to respond. Like it took me a long time to figure out that actually when I'm listening to people, I often nod, and that's a response, and that might get in the way of this sort of listening. This raw experience of just hearing and taking in the words and noticing what's happening in our bodies when we have that experience. Right? Does that make sense? Okay.
And then in addition, the external, you could pay attention to and kind of guess what you think is happening within the other person. So we're doing both at the same time. So we want you to consider...
First, figure out who's going to talk first and who's going to... And then you're going to switch, so...
We'll keep time for you. We'll ring a bell, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
How long do we have?
5 minutes.
I think 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay, 3 minutes.
What are we going to talk about?
Okay,
That's
so
coming up. Haven't gotten there yet.
So the question or the prompt is, when do you allow yourself to be vulnerable? or tender, or recall a time or situation recently or in the past where you remember being vulnerable with another person. So one of those two things, when do you allow yourself to be vulnerable or tender, or maybe a particular time or situation where you remember being vulnerable with another person. And we're not really asking you to be vulnerable here. We're asking you to talk about an experience, but if you want to move towards being a little bit more vulnerable, this is your opportunity. So you can see where it is, and if you do feel like you can move towards that or you don't, then pay attention to that. Okay.
Begin. So if you can bring your conversation to a close. Take a moment, before you move apart, take a moment to just close your eyes. Let the experience of talking and listening, just allow that to register. See if you can notice what each of those moments were like. What was it like for you to be there in that space? And then you can just thank your partner and move back to the large group. Do you want to leave the conversation? I'm going to try this, unless they have questions.
Ask a question on the tree. So we are really curious and interested to hear from you what your experience was like in that dyad, or any other comments that you have about today, or anything that came up in the past month. So, and then just I encourage people who don't normally speak, who have a very slow processing speed, to kind of see if it's possible for you to say something. Maybe there's something that you are thinking about saying, but you wouldn't. So it's an invitation to those people who don't speak much.
Tell us your name first, too, please.
My name is Samuel. That was wonderful. The very structure of it made it safe, and there was an energy that we exchanged that I think we experienced the freshness and delight, the freedom of vulnerability, and he spoke first. Brought up, he invited me my own vulnerability, which also then puts me in contact with my life force, which is so fucking pleasurable, you know, what's here right now in the moment. Thank you.
Hi.
I'm Rob. It was good, but I must say that I do this every day. Every day that I encounter people, whether it's a stranger in a grocery store or my friends, sometimes I'm in solitude for weeks. Obviously, I don't do it then. But I have practiced for 30 years to be open to people and just love them upon first sight. And they can open or not.
Thank you.
My name is Ray. was no sense of shame, but vulnerability was there. It was like, okay, I'm open. I'm just listening. I'm ready. It was a very positive experience for me.
Hi.
My name is Michael. There's something I call listening noises, and that's when you're talking to somebody and they say, "Oh, yeah, mm-hmm, oh, those are listening noises." And I said it was interesting talking with my dear friend Rick and not being able to make listening noises or nod or smile. Just it was challenging, actually very challenging, and it was a good exercise. Not myself responding, but just taking it all in. Thank you.
I felt naturally open and comfortable with my partner, being vulnerable with my partner. I couldn't, you said, you're not asking me to be vulnerable, but why bother? And I realized, reflecting on vulnerable moments, that it's when I feel most honest or authentic and expose myself. It was really risky being seen when I was young, and being honest or reaching for truth, in myself and what's true for somebody else. But and I like being reminded of limbic resonance. That I tried to remember at the time about what that is, and I noticed for me it's about being a certain level of receptivity. That if I really am in my body, so to speak, I feel a natural resonance that happens. And thank you. That was really useful.
Well, Mike and I mentioned that we had seen each other for years, we never actually had a conversation, and we really want to continue this. We're making a lunch dinner, and this was really rich. And we really just got just the tiniest taste, and I raised a lot of things that we both want to know more about one another. So it was interesting. And I don't think this maybe would have happened if we hadn't had this exercise.
Yeah, in reference to what Michael called listening noises.
Tell us your name again.
My name is Jay. I realize how dependent I am on both hearing and saying them, because I feel like that kind of response, when I'm speaking, indicates to me that the other person is listening, and then it gives me permission to keep on going, and I do the same in reverse, especially in places like on the phone. I wait sometimes for an indication that the other person is listening. There you are. Now we'll keep going. But if you're not, why should I keep going?
You still talk on the phone?
I saw a hand over here somewhere.
Yeah, I was gonna. It's really actually echoing. Oh, my name is Rick. Echoing was that I realized even basically being non-reactive to listening to somebody without my brain evaluating, judging, categorizing, thinking about a response. How does that apply to me? I think it is important to encourage that the non-verbal things that you also communicate when you're speaking to each other, monitoring body language, not doing this from the other group, helps take away the awkwardness of the words, and I believe helps move you into a more relaxed and open space with each other. And so for me, I could do my monologue, but it felt very, I could have gone perhaps even deeper, willing to risk going deeper with someone who's my best friend, but nevertheless, it could have been a listening noise, it could have been a nod, it could have been a smile, it could be a gesture, that tells me, yes, this is good, let's keep going, like Jay waiting for somebody to respond on the telephone, whatever a telephone is. So that's my reaction to it, which is, that's part and parcel of how we go deeper with people is by communicating, not necessarily what they're saying, but the freedom to express themselves. That's safe.
We're out of time. I want to say part of what's really interesting is to notice why it is that I need to rely on those things to open me up. In other words, notice what we rely on. What are the things that, and are they useful or not? Like, do I want to be relying on that? So, we heard a couple of people express the sort of need to hear those affirmative. But then think about, well, why is it that I need that? Why is that in charge of how I open up, rather than my own decision to open up? Or how is it that those things also take me out of my experience of listening? Because what's really interesting is when you're listening, we can use those things to sort of keep ourselves protected, right? So then it's interesting to notice all of these ways that we, whether we're listening or speaking, what's at play in this soup. We are out of time.
Wait, I want to say one thing.
Oh, okay.
I forget your name back there. I really appreciated what you said because it very much is a part of this practice. Is the meditation provides a field to get to know ourselves, but that needs to be joined with an intention and action. And so every time we have a meeting or an interaction, we have to make the decision over and over again until it becomes a habit to move towards that person with greater intimacy and love. And I was really in awe that you've been doing that for 30 years. Very beautiful. So
there was one, I want to hear what David. None.
Are you sure, David?
Over tea.
Can I just throw out one thing that I haven't heard yet, which is healthy boundaries.
Uh-huh.
Those are really important. You can't just be vulnerable all the time to everyone. So that's something I just haven't heard as part of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say that I think intimacy takes healthy boundaries in relationship to vulnerability and your sharing story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you, guys, for the whole 4-part. Let's see. Next week is an open discussion, small group discussion. To come back to that. And what other announcements are there?
We received a check from the community thrift store for $638.
Wow.
So thanks to those people who donated. And as a reminder, if you have books, shoes, clothes, things you want to get rid of, the community thrift store will take them and give us a kickback.
Kickback. On February 9th, I'll be doing a day-long with Lama Rod Owens called Decolonizing Sexuality, sort of the intersection of undoing patriarchy, undoing white supremacy, and healthier sexuality expressions.
Do you have flyers out there for that?
I do know that. But you can go to the East Bay Meditation Center website, and it's on there, or you can go to my website, which is queerdharma.net, and the information's on there as well.
That's where is it held?
East Bay Meditation Center.
Yeah.
Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jim. I'm your host for the day. Welcome, new guys. Welcome, visitors. There is a mailing list, a sign-up sheet right out here if you would like to get stuff from us. There are refreshments, some healthier than others out there. There's hot water for tea. Just leave your cups in the sink and I'll wash them out. I'll be going around with a Dana bowl. Dana is the Buddhist tradition of sharing abundance with, like with priests in the monastery or with the impoverished. But it's also about, contributing to a village building a new well. And this place is a village well. So look at it that way. I'll be going around, we suggest $10, more or less according to your situation. Frequently people who want to have lunch together gather at the door at 12:30. Also, I want to underline the book that Baruch mentioned. It's A New Theory of Love by 3 shrinks at UCSF. I don't know how they collaborated on it because it's gorgeously written. But it's based on the mammalian psychology and the capacity for mammals to read each other's minds. And it talks about why dogs are such good company, because you are absolutely, transparent to a loving animal. And why they're such good company anyway. I highly recommend it. I think that's it for me.
New theory?
A New Theory of Love.
There's a bag on the table out there. It's a bag of grapefruits that were picked on Thursday in Palm Springs. Please help yourself.
And just a quick reminder about the Gay Buddhist Fellowship Retreat on March 23rd. The flyers are out on the credenza.
Also, if you try to open up the website in Internet Explorer, it doesn't work. But I opened up in Mozilla, so probably Chrome works. So.
All right. And I think already on the website we have the other 3 parts of this series. If you want to listen, if you weren't here and you want to listen. Any other announcements? Okay, let's gather for
So by the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.